Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast,
where we explore natural, homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Parenting Coach, coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my 3 wildlings and the Papa Bear in our fixer-upper on the beach. This is episode 42, and today I'm here with Teacher Tom talking about Playschool. Tom Hobson is a preschool teacher, writer, speaker, artist, and author, best known for his Teacher Tom's blog. After nearly 20 years as a teacher, he now helps others start their own play-based neighborhood preschools and travels the world sharing his views on early childhood education, play, and pedagogy. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. Shout out to our new patrons, Paula Wiseman and Joy McTavish. Thank you for aligning your money with your values and joining the Sage Family Patreon community, where on the first of every month I do a video Q&A. It's like mini coaching exclusively for Patreon supporters. And you all are welcome to join in the party by becoming Patreon supporters at patreon.com/Sage Family. I also want to invite you to share your favorite episodes of the Sage Family Podcast on social media. Take a screenshot right in your podcast app and post it in an Instagram story. And if you tag me in it, I can share it too. I have to admit that when people post a photo of the Sage homeschooling book or Sage Family Podcast episode along with a little rave review or joy-filled emoticon, it puts a huge smile on my face. So thank you. The adventure of the week this week was snow tubing with my nieces who came up for a visit. It was so much fun. Hours of thrilling play through snow tracks and snow drifts and snowfall. But when we were pulling into the parking lot after the long drive, our car got stuck in the snow while everyone excitedly began putting on all the layers. My youngest little wildling is calibrated for freedom, and being pinned inside a crowded car and wrapped in hot confining layers triggered a really hard moment for him. I opened the car door and pulled him outside, where I knew the fresh cold air and open space would begin to calm him. Then I quietly explained in his ear, there is a great snowy mountain steps away for you to summit. So I'm going to put on your layers as quickly as I can, and then we will run together and throw ourselves into the snow. He still struggled and cried a little, but lovingly squeezed my hand in understanding. The second he was dressed, we ran to the nearest snowdrift and threw ourselves in. I knew that as soon as his body was engaged, he would feel grounded, centered, and sure enough, he began swimming through the chest-deep snow. Any distress melted into peace and joy. I find the real magic in parenting is to know and honor each child's unique way of being. My first would have needed us to pause everything, hug, and talk it out, to cocoon together. My second would have needed a few minutes to himself with no touching or talking. My third needed to move his body. It feels like a dance in partnership. We are all going to have hard moments, so let's get to know each other and ourselves really well and design our lifestyle to allow for them. If you want to see photos and videos of this adventure, then head on over to Sage Parenting on Instagram and follow along. Today, Teacher Tom is joining me to share a conversation on Playschool. I have been following and sharing posts from Teacher Tom's incredible blog for years, where he blows so many misguided assumptions about childhood out of the water and speaks fearlessly to honoring the natural child. And I am so excited that my best friend, whose little one got to attend his cooperative preschool, was able to put us in connection to share a conversation today. So why don't you tell our audience a little about yourself? Who are you, and to what do you devote your energy?
Oh, okay. Well, I am known as Teacher Tom. My name is Tom Hobson. I've become known as Teacher Tom mainly because that's what the children call me at school. And when I started a blog, I named it 10 years ago. I named it Teacher Tom. So I've become, even my wife calls me Teacher Tom sometimes. So anyway, I didn't think I was going to be a teacher. That wasn't really in the plans for me. I mean, I was in my 30s, had a newborn baby. I had the good fortune that many men don't have of being the stay-at-home parent, and got to be there with my little girl when she was quite young. And in my instincts, honestly, if I left it to my own devices, I tend to be kind of an introvert. I probably would have stayed home all day, cooking with her, doing things with her, hanging around the house. But my daughter clearly takes after her mother, and before she was 2 years old, she would say things to me like, "Let's go do something." She needed to get out of the house, so I didn't know what else to do. So I'd take her out to parks and playgrounds and things like that, and then I started thinking, well, maybe she needs more kids in this. Maybe she needs to be in preschool, because I didn't know anything about it. I just thought, well, that's kind of, I guess, the next step, and I asked I told my wife about it, and she said, no, she's too young. And then I talked to my mother-in-law about it, and she said, no, she's too young. And I talked to my mother about it, and she said, no. When those three women say no to you, that you just go with it. And so I thought, all right, well, great. I guess they said, she's lucky she's got you at home. And so anyway, I was hanging out with her, just trying to cobble together a social life for her. And, I didn't know anything about homeschooling or anything. I mean, I'm just like a guy who had a baby.
Stumbling through it.
Like everybody is when they have a baby, right?
Yes.
So anyway, one day I was talking to a woman, and she's at the playground, and while the kids were playing, and she said that her son attended a cooperative preschool. And I said, tell me about that. And she said, well, a cooperative school is the kind of school where the parents who enroll their children own and operate the school. And that the most appealing part to me was, and the parents go to school with their children. Mm. And I thought, okay. And then when I ran this by the three most important women in my life, they all said, okay, as long as you go with her, then she can be in preschool. And what you're calling Playschool, and that's kind of what we do, right? It was a place to get together with other children and other families and play together. And I just found my niche. I really discovered, I think, my life's passion. And so when my daughter got old enough that she moved on and started going to regular kindergarten, her teacher said to me, "What are you going to do with your life, Tom?" And I said, I don't know. I had been a freelance writer up before the birth of my daughter, and the idea of going back and sitting at a computer sounded really boring, kind of dark days. And so she said, "Well, you should be a teacher." And so I did some coursework, and I was hired almost instantly at the Woodland Park Cooperative School, where I was there for the better part of the last 20 years, teaching children from the ages of 2 to 5 years old. During that time, I mentioned my blog. So about 10 years ago, I started writing this blog mainly as a way to sort of process what was going on at school, to kind of reflect on what was happening, and to communicate. And mainly, I was trying to communicate with parents. Because to be honest, I don't think I'd even ever read a blog before I started writing it. I just thought, I'd been a writer, and I thought, okay, this is a good opportunity. My parents and my community can read what's going on at school. And, the thing that happens, as you learn from your podcast, I'm sure too, is that, the whole world's listening. Mm-hmm. And suddenly people from Australia and people from Greece and people from kind of all over the world were chiming in. And then it just has grown from there. So I've gone on to that. People kept asking if I was going to write a book. So I finally wrote a book. That came out about a year ago, maybe a little bit more, and so that's my passion. That's what gets me out of bed. Is I realized that I'd always thought I was going to be this junior businessman and hang around with the best and the brightest, because I wanted to be around great brains. That's all I really knew. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't until I started hanging around with the 2-year-olds that I realized this is where the greatest brains in the world are.
Yes.
And this is scientifically true. I mean, NASA, when they do their tests of creativity tests, they find that, the average population, about 2% of adults qualify as creative geniuses. 95% of children qualify as under 5 qualify as creative geniuses.
The neuroplasticity is incredible to witness.
Well, they're just, their ability to perceive the world in unstructured ways. They haven't been damaged. They haven't been damaged yet. I mean, I think is really what, and that's really what I think of as our role as adults with young children is we're a lot like doctors. At first, do no harm.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about that. So, what assumptions, expectations, and beliefs about children do schools and many parents get wrong?
Oh, I think, the more I look at kind of the more complex kind of theories on education, all that, the more I realize that we sort of have this idea that children are some kind of idiots and that if we don't take their hand and guide them through everything, I'm not saying you feel that way or I feel that way or our listeners feel that way. I'm saying that as a society, I think we have this idea that children are kind of incomplete adults. They're not fully formed human beings, that somehow it's incumbent upon us to mold them as if they're just lumps of clay there. Mm-hmm. And I think that really, and what it does is it's really informed what we do with children. It's informed what traditional schooling looks like, where we feel like we have to, march them through 13 years plus of curriculum, and then spit them out on the other side, and they're fully formed human beings. And of course, that's sort of I always call that the sort of a Hobbesian way of raising children, this concept that humans are essentially evil.
Yes, I was going to say there's a component of evil that's in there too. It's like they're blank and we have to write the code for them, but also they have this natural evil bent, which is not at all true.
Well, right. I mean, that was back in the early 1600s. That's Thomas Hobbes was a great philosopher, and that's what he was talking about. And we still see that, the echoes of that life would be nasty, brutish, and short without strong controls of government and schools and religion and all that kind of stuff. But then it was later, the Enlightenment guys like John Locke and Rousseau and people like that started talking about, well, humans are essentially good. Mm-hmm. And our role, and I still think this is our role, and this is our role as parents, and it should be our role as self-governing citizens, is to help others achieve their highest potential.
Yeah.
And that's what we're there to do. And the only way to do that is to give them space to achieve their highest potential.
That is beautiful. So what components of schools are not really serving children, not fostering the qualities that we hope to support long term?
Well, if we're talking about traditional schools,
yes.
I mean, or what we call traditional schools, what have become traditional schools. Almost everything about them is counterintuitive. I mean, honestly, people get mad at me when I say this, and
I will not.
And this is not to throw teachers under the bus either, because my colleagues out there, those people are doing, the Lord's work. Mm-hmm. Teachers are in their classrooms, and they are working in a difficult environment, and the best teachers out there are all incredibly subversive. They are teaching the proper things, and they are supporting children in the cracks and crevices. Mm-hmm. And so I am proud of them, and I do not want any teachers out there to think that I'm running them down. But the concept of what we call school is this notion that came out of from all I could tell, came out of the Industrial Revolution.
Yep.
And this idea that somehow that the jobs of tomorrow, and they still talk about the jobs of tomorrow, right? The jobs of tomorrow were going to involve everybody moving off the farms and going into the big cities and then spending their days on a factory
the assembly line. Mm-hmm.
And so we needed to prepare them for that. So we created a system that's based on just intuition. It's not based or just guesswork. It wasn't ever based on research. I mean, nobody
it's arbitrary.
It's totally arbitrary.
Yep.
So the idea is to put them in chairs and face them in one direction and run them along the assembly line, and they go from chapter to chapter to chapter, test to test to test, grade to grade to grade, and somehow just like I said before, at the end of the manufacturing process, we filled these empty vessels up, and now they're fully formed human beings. And of course, that never happened, right? I mean, those jobs. I mean, some people went to work in factories, but most people didn't. And that's the same thing that's true today when people talk about getting children ready for the jobs of tomorrow. And that's what if you listen to policymakers, you would think that's what schooling is for, or education is for, simply to serve the economy. And that's, for me, what we want our children to be educated for is, first of all, the personal aspects and personal growth and all that. But really, as a society, we purport to be a democratic society. We want them to be good citizens.
Yeah.
People who think for themselves, who are critical thinkers, who ask a lot of questions, who question authority, who stand up for their own beliefs and also listen to others as they stand up for their beliefs, and who understand they contribute in ways, far beyond the merely economic. I mean, they contribute artistically, politically, religiously, as members of communities, as neighbors. There's so many different ways that we contribute to make a fully functioning democratic society, or self-governing society, I should say.
I love you even more now that we're only 2 questions in. I wrote a Sage homeschooling book, and the whole first chapter is basically me making that rant. And that, like, the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow, like all of those types of jobs that the industrial model school system is preparing them for, are jobs that machines do now. Like, we can look up the year that World War II ended on our cell phone in 3 seconds. And
that's right.
Robots do all of that assembly line work for the most part. Like, so those traits that we're selecting for in this system just don't make sense anymore.
Well, and also how much hubris it takes to think that anybody knows what the jobs are going to be 20 years from now when our babies, get out and enter the workforce. Yep. There's no way for us to know that, and nobody has ever known that, and everybody who's ever said that has been wrong about it.
100% agree.
What they're talking about is what jobs they can't fill today.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, they're worried right now. They don't have enough. I don't know what it is in technology too. They don't have enough coders or something like that. So they've got to make sure they get them for the future. And by the time our kids get, I mean, I guess the great truth is that every generation actually creates their own jobs.
Yes.
Those jobs are tomorrow are going to be created by the children that are in our preschools and in our, homeschools and everything else right now. They're going to be the ones creating those jobs. And it's going to not look like anything. I mean, my daughter's 23 right now. The job she's looking for didn't exist when she was 5.
Yes, my job didn't exist when I was in high school. My husband's job, he's a senior user experience designer. Like, that job did not exist when he was in college. It didn't exist, and we're pretty young still.
And 20 years from now, that job won't exist.
Nope.
He'll have to have a whole new career.
So instead, we really need to be focusing on what qualities, like you said, help to create this democratic society that we purport to value, and what helps to create the type of humans that we want to live in community with.
Exactly. And also people who, what are the things that always lead to success? And I mean success in terms of having a satisfying life, not in money, obviously.
Right.
Although that can be part of it. I'm not dismissive of that. But being self-motivated is always a marketable skill in any category you go into. Working well with other people is always, and it's a great democratic skill too, by the way. And being personable, being somebody other people just want to spend time with. And that we undervalue that one. Being somebody who, and that means listening to other people. That means, having certain level of courtesy and understanding and empathy for other people. And for me, those are the skills that if you look around at successful people, that's what they all have.
Yes, that like intrinsic motivation, the ability to collaborate, cooperatively with others, to be self-reflective and self-governing and autonomous, and to feel a sense of personal responsibility for the greater good, and all of these sort of qualities that are fostered in like a natural learning lifestyle, or a like cooperative based preschool like you've created, but not you don't get that through standardized testing.
Well, and you're not going to get that through telling people, marching them through a curriculum, telling them what to learn, when to learn it, and by when they need to learn it, and because what you're going to is that, and I mean, if you look at surveys of CEOs, and again, I don't mean that's why we're here for education, but when they're asked what skills are going to be the most important for the future, they talk about the same things we just talked about: creativity and self-motivation and innovation and all that. You can't get from there to there from where we are right now. It's just you can't like tell people what to do for till they're 18 years old and then suddenly say, now you're an adult, go do it. The only way to do it is to practice it, and we should start practicing that. I mean, truly, the word is freedom. In my point of view, is truly experiencing what freedom is all about and the pain of freedom, and experience that too, because freedom is not just pure joy and do whatever you want, because there are a lot of self-limits on freedom, and there's a lot of things you learn to say, boy, I'm free to do that, but I don't want to do that anymore.
Yes, there seems to be this disconnect, like in the education system. Like there was a study that came out that said that valedictorians do not perform very well as adults, like in the
that
job
doesn't
market.
surprise me. That
No,
doesn't
right?
surprise me, no.
Exactly, because they win at playing the game of doing what they're told, and
Right.
and there's that same disconnect in the education as in the parenting arena, where parents will say, I want my child to be obedient, and then you say, well, what qualities do you hope your child has in adulthood? And it's like, I hope they stand up for what's right. And we have this parallel of this same phenomenon that when you point it out to people, I mean, it's laughable, they get it.
Right.
But at the same time, in the policies and the parenting philosophies and all of that they take, like they're not compatible with those
Right.
qualities that they want to foster.
Well, and this is why I say to parents in the fall orientation, I always tell them, I am going to be teaching your children to question your authority.
Yes.
And they laugh nervously, and some of them say, well, they're already doing that. And I say, good, they're doing what they should be doing.
Yes. Oh man, I love that. Okay, so I mean, we've talked a lot about like how children don't learn. Talk to us a little bit about how do children learn? What have you witnessed in all of your years working with kids?
Well, I mean, obviously, what we do is what we call a play-based curriculum, right? And so that's one of those terms that a lot of people use, and it can refer to a lot of things, and all of them are essentially positive for children. Just in case your listeners don't know this, there's all kinds of different models. Some of the most famous play-based models are things like Reggio Emilia, Montessori, the Waldorf system. There's democratic free schools. And essentially what all of them have in common is this idea that children learn best when they are asking and answering their own questions. Mm. And when you watch children at play, that's what they're doing. They are constantly asking and answering their own questions. And so you see them all the time. So that, to me, that's the kernel of what we're trying to do, because what play is our instinct to become educated. Mm-hmm. And we know all animals do this. I mean, back at the turn of the last century, the leading theory for the existence of play, like that Victorian idea, was that play existed to burn off excess energy. But this was the time when some of the great thinkers in education were starting to take a look at what really made play happen and why play was important. People like Piaget, Jean Piaget, and Lev Vygotsky and Maria Montessori and John Dewey and some of these great thinkers who were sitting there and they were saying, listen, play is much more meaningful than this, that this is self-directed learning is what's taking place. Yes. And this is the natural way for humans to learn. And one of the researchers was a man named Karl Gruss. He was a German psychologist. And he was started by studying play in animals. And we see play in animals, right? Mm-hmm. Mammals play. We all know that mammals play. We know that birds play. I've watched a turtle chase a beach ball around a room, bumping it and chasing it like a little shelled soccer player before. So it feels like reptiles play. I watched a woman one time brought a garden snail to our classroom, and she put it on the palm of her hand, and she held it by a stream of tap water. And the snail reached out its little antenna and touched the water, pulled back, touched the water again, pulled back, then started actually holding its antenna. They're not antenna, but that's what I'm calling them. Antenna in the water, and then eventually started rubbing its entire foot up and down. If that's not play, I don't know what is. So here we have invertebrates that seem to also play. Yeah. And so to me, it's a fundamental condition of being alive. Yes. Is play. And this is out there research, but I've read one researcher who even believes he's seen evidence of play in one-cell organisms. He believes he has that. I'm not quite sure I buy that one yet, but and I just read a book called The Hidden Life of Trees this summer, where the forester who wrote it feels that he sees evidence that trees play with one another.
Yes, I've read about that book.
And so it's fascinating to me that I wouldn't be surprised if we don't end up in a place where we discover that play is as essential as respiration to life.
It's an evolutionary imperative.
It is, absolutely. That's exactly what it is. And so what children do is play, to me, is a freely chosen activity, which means that it's not play when an adult says, come on, let's go play a game of baseball. Mm-hmm. And the adult organizes the baseball game. And the adult
makes the rules and enforces the rules. And makes the rule.
Exactly. And makes them all play and makes every team have 9 players and all of that. Play would be the kind of baseball I grew up playing when we'd go out in the street. And you would have, you'd have maybe 7 or 8 kids, and you'd pick up sides, and there'd be boys and girls and little kids and big kids, and you'd kind of throw down some bases, and you played according to abilities. if the 4-year-old was batting, you didn't try to strike him out. You kind of tossed the ball more gently. Nobody had to tell you to do that.
Yeah.
So because you knew if that kid, wasn't having fun, he'd leave the game and then the game's over. So you were motivated to keep the game going. And so nobody had to tell us to treat people gently. We naturally would start. Maybe you'd make the mistake a few times and then you realize, wait a minute, the game's no fun if everybody leaves.
And the mixed age bit, right? Like you go more gently with the littler kids and you go harder with the bigger kids.
Exactly. And you intuitively did that. You didn't need somebody out there scolding you. Be gentle with that little child. I remember, this was my favorite. And I want to eat up all your time with my childhood stories.
No,
but
do it.
I grew up in the side of a former pine forest in South Carolina. And so our neighborhood had all these pine cones all over the ground. And, we all, progressive educators, people with young children, we know that pine cones are lovely for crafts and building little fairies out of and stuff. But that's, of course, not the real use of pine cones. What you do with pine cones is you pick them up and you throw them at somebody. Right? And
Nature grenade.
And we would go out there and we would get these farmers markets baskets and we would spend all morning collecting our ammunition, arming ourselves, because there was going to be a big pine cone fight later in the day. And, the parents are all inside their houses because this was back in the 60s. And so there's not going to be a lot of the adults let the children play outside sort of unsupervised. And we were out there, we'd collect all this ammunition, and then the battle was on, and we would just be going nuts, throwing these things at each other. But, you would never throw it at somebody's head or face.
Yeah.
You were always aiming for the torso, or probably the lower torso even. And, and if you were close, you knew not to throw it really hard. When you're close to them, you took something off of it. And if somebody did get hit in the face or something, and they got hurt, boy, that game stopped instantly. And everybody would be crowding around it. It would be like, you're okay. It's only bleeding a little bit. I don't think your mom will even notice. And that was the important piece, because if the moms got involved, the game was going to get scuttled. God, you can't play that anymore. You're getting hurt. And so we had such a drive to keep the game going. Peter Gray writes about this in his book, Free to Learn. That drive to keep the game going. And and so to me, this is where we learned the fundamental skills of living in a society with one another. The fundamental skills of getting your own needs met while also creating the space for others to get their needs met. Because we all want to just keep the game going.
Wow, that is so beautifully said. Please tell all the stories from your childhood that you feel inspired to share. Let's talk about that socialization piece. Like you said that that was really part of the inspiration for you to move into this space, was that you were feeling like a longing for a social community. So what have you learned about socialization from observing children playing together for so many years?
Well, one thing I've learned is that they are naturally anarchists in the best sense of that word. I mean that in the best sense of that word is they generally they are very ad hoc about creating their rules and their ways of living with one another. They tend to they'll play together and they'll bicker like mad. Especially as they get to be around 3, 4, 5 years old. It seems like from the outside, when you're watching children playing, it looks like all they're doing is bickering with each other. Right? At least during periods. And then they kind of get through to their agreements. And then they make these agreements with one another. And then they play happily together for a while, and it's beautiful. And you step back and you think, oh, lovely childhood. And then they go back through a phase of bickering. And that's because you've got to constantly negotiate this. And children, they actually don't see this as a negative unless we teach them it's a negative.
Yes.
Or unless it devolves into physical violence. And then that's when the adult steps in. And, because we can't let them be bopping each other on the head.
Yeah, I run a homeschool adventure club that I call Hack School, and sometimes, or one time in particular, the kids were running around playing in nature, and they were trying to get some game going that didn't make sense to any of us adults, but whatever, like that's awesome. And it seemed that they were kind of stuck in the bickering for a while, and one of the parents said, I'll just jump in and help them get over this bit so they can start playing before we have to go. And I sort of invited him to not. And said like, no, this is the good stuff. This is why you're here. Like this is what they need.
Well, I have this theory. I call it's the theory of the 15 minutes. And this is totally my own theory, but it's supported by my observation, so I just throw it out there for what it's worth. Is in any given play situation when children come together, the first 15 minutes, whenever there's materials or whatever there is for them, a space, the first 15 minutes, usually there's a lot of independent play with children sort of exploring the space, seeing what things do, picking up materials, trying to work with them. And then after about 15 minutes, they start bumping into each other. Hey, you knocked down my building. Oh, no, I was using that. And then the bickering starts. And often it ramps up. And that's when we sometimes need to step in if it gets physical or something like that. But for the most part, if you can get through to that 15 minutes, then you hit the beautiful part, the third 15 minutes, where they actually start cooperating with each other, where they've negotiated with each other, where they've made their agreements with each other. So that's why in any given situation, children need a minimum of 45 minutes in order to become fully engaged. And I think it's obviously more like, at least an hour, an hour and a half, to become fully engaged with what they're doing. It was several years ago, the Seattle Public School, I live in Seattle, and the Seattle Public School teachers were on strike. And shockingly, they had many other strike demands, but one of their demands was that elementary school children, the demand was that the children got at least a half an hour a day playing outside.
Oh my God.
And that was their demand because the kids were getting less than that.
Wow.
And they won that one. But I remember I asked some teacher friends of mine, I said, listen, who's against the kids being outside for a few hours a day? I mean, who's against this? Who thinks they should be out less than an hour a day? And it turned out there's some teachers, but mostly it was administrators. And what they said was, well, after about 15 minutes, all they do is fight. And I said, well, duh, because you've given them just enough time to get out there and get to the conflict part, and then you send them inside.
Yeah, before they can get through that.
Before they can learn anything. And that, and fundamentally, that's what we spend our days doing, right? I mean, this is what you watch children do, and this is when they play, and this is what I've experienced as an adult, is that mainly what we do all day long is you get together with other people, sit around a table or whatever, and decide what are we going to do. And you have some issue or some challenge, and everybody sits around together and discusses it. Each person brings their own skills and opinions and points of view to the table, and you figure out what you're going to do or how you're going to do it or what needs to be done. The only place where we don't do that is in traditional schools. Mm-hmm. I mean, what's the worst thing you could do in a traditional school? Cheat off somebody else's paper.
Yep.
And when children are playing, they're constantly taking advantage of each other's skills and knowledge. Mm-hmm. One of the things I always say is that, one of the beautiful parts about being an educator in a play-based setting is I don't have to know anything. I really don't. The children themselves will cobble together a perfectly age-appropriate curriculum whenever they come together and have a discussion. Try it with dinosaurs sometimes. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know nothing about dinosaurs. But when the topic comes up, suddenly you have 2, 3, 4-year-olds using terms like herbivore and carnivore and Jurassic and Tyrannosaurus Rex and concepts like extinction and volcanic activity. They have these amazing, and maybe no one of them has that information, but amongst them as they discuss, they have enough information to educate themselves, and they have a perfectly age-appropriate curriculum.
Yes.
I mean, I'm going to give you another slightly off color one, so you can cut this one out if you don't want to use it. But this one happened a couple years ago, and I was sitting down with there were 4 and 5-year-old girls, and I was sitting with them, and they were just playing with Play-Doh, and they were making and baking things and whatever. And one of the little girls came over to me, a little girl named Mari, and she said, "Teacher Tom, look at my butt." And she stuck her butt out at me. And I said, "Oh, Mari, I don't want to look at your butt." And then her friend Willa thought that was funny, and she came over and said, "Teacher Tom, look at my butt." And I said, "I don't want to look at your butts." And Willa was really sort of serious. She said, "Well, why don't you want to look at our butts?" And I said, "I don't know. I guess it's just that's where your poop comes out, and I don't want to think about your poop." And then this other girl was sitting over beside me, and she said, "Well, pee comes out of my butt." And we all just stopped and looked at her. And Mari said, "Aurelia, pee doesn't come out of your butt. I think that's diarrhea." and then another one of the girls said, "No, your pee comes out of your vagina." And I thought, and another girl said, "No, the vagina is the inside part. It's your vulva." And I'm a man here. I'm Googling away, right? So, and then Willa, who's like this expert, she stood up. She said, "No, I have a body book. The pee comes out of your urethra."
Oh my God,
and you
I love this story.
So they had cobbled together this perfectly age-appropriate curriculum around female genitals, something that I probably would have been uncomfortable doing and maybe not confident that I was doing it correctly. But here they had done it. They had cobbled together this perfectly. And this is what happens all day long when children are allowed to interact with each other and share their knowledge and play together, because what they're doing is sitting down around tables or around carpets or around stumps outside or whatever they're sitting around and deciding what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And they negotiate and they come to agreements, which fundamentally is the basis of democratic society, is us agreeing with each other about things.
Yes, and that's how we grow in our knowledge on really important topics. I mean, we're talking about like finding the cure to cancer. It doesn't happen from somebody moving through an instruction sheet on their own. It's like these same conversations that you were just talking about with female genitalia with curing cancer.
Well, and it doesn't even, and it's never one person either. It's a whole team of
Yes, that's
people.
what I'm saying. It's like one person has this idea and this other person says, oh, well, I read about this study and this other person is working on this project, and they share it. And then from that comes this new inspiration and it just keeps moving forward. I mean, that's how real, meaningful, like world-changing ideas and inventions and innovations get developed. It's from that exact same process that we're really cutting off for so many children. I had this like really powerful moment where my firstborn was in traditional public school for the first couple of years. And in the exact same day, I had been in the classroom and my kid was talking and the teacher said, "You're not here to socialize. We don't talk in the classroom." And then later that day, I was telling somebody that I was thinking about homeschooling and they said, "Well, what about socialization?" It's like the disconnect is just, it's laughable.
That is funny. That's good.
So with that socialization piece, like how do you help the kids resolve conflict? Like in my book, we have like these 3 agreements in our family where I intervene if you're harming yourself or others or the environment. And sometimes intervening looks like an invitation, like I'm noticing that you're having a hard time with this and it seems like you're feeling frustrated. I'm wondering if I can help. Like if you're harming somebody else, obviously I would step in and establish some sort of containment. But how do you, like what approach do you take to helping the kids resolve conflict in your school?
Well, I think you pretty much described it. I mean, that's how I look at it, is it's if there is conflict and it arises, obviously human beings have tendencies to have conflicts with each other, and we tend to be emotional, right? So the conflicts where there's a lot of emotions come up, right? And so sometimes we lose control. I flip our lids, and if there's physical violence or somebody's getting hurt, or I would say kind of emotional violence or abuse can sometimes be there when somebody's just a dominant type of personality and it's scaring the other person, frightening them. I mean, I'll do the same thing. I'll step in and I'll say, one of the things we do though that I think is really great, that really useful, is that in our classroom, the children make their own rules. So we start from the very beginning of the year discussing what our agreements are with each other. And I try to use the word agreements instead of rules. And so it starts, and I tell the parents, like I said, they're in the classroom with me, and I tell them on the first day of school, we are beginning in an official state of anarchy. And the only thing we're here to do is prevent the children from killing each other. And usually it's always within the first day, but usually within the first hour or so, someone has said, "Hey, he hit me." And that's my opportunity to say, "Well, you didn't like that. Does anybody like to be hit?" No, nobody likes to be hit. Why don't we just all agree not to hit each other? And so then I'll write this down. And these are pre-reading children, but that's okay. I still write it down. And so we write, no hitting. And then usually then there's a little session of, kids suggesting, well, how about no kicking, no biting, no yelling in people's ears, no throwing things at people. We come up with really a good list because they're really good at thinking of what they don't want to have happen to them.
Yeah.
And we come up with this great list of agreements by consensus. And we have these up on the wall. And what that does is that puts me as the adult in a position, or all the adults in a position, that then I'm never saying to them, no hitting, no biting, no taking things. What I'm saying is we all agreed, which might sound like semantics, but it's fundamentally a different thing. One of them is me commanding them. One of me is telling them what to do. And then they have a choice. They can obey me or disobey me. You talked about obedience before. Obey or disobey, which is really not a position where anybody's thinking at all. They're just reacting. In this case, we create the space by saying we all agreed to not hit each other. It creates a space where they can do their own thing. Yeah, we all agreed, and I'm hitting. Maybe I shouldn't. It creates the opportunity for them to say, maybe I shouldn't be hitting. or to at
Yeah.
least reflect on what they're doing, or no taking things. Oh yeah, I did agree not to take things. It's not perfect, but it certainly it means that people are thinking rather than just reacting,
Yeah,
which I think is an important
it's,
thing.
It's tapping into this whole different part of the brain when you're saying,
Right.
no hitting, that's my rule, obey it. And
Right.
reminding them, remember how we agreed that we didn't want to be hit? Like that's just,
Right.
it's accessing a totally different part of the brain.
Well, and when you say it that way too, it's true when we say we all agreed, whereas a lot of times what people say is we use walking feet, or we don't hit people, and the kid's like, yeah, we do. I just did it. It's like you're fundamentally lying to them, right? Of course we hit people. I just did it. And I think that's, and so anyway, so what I like to do is I like to encourage people to, as long as you don't see the physical violence or some other sort of harmful thing, as you mentioned, I like to suggest that being near is helpful. You can put your body physically near to the conflict. If it's a contention over an object and they're pulling it back and forth, a lot of times what I'll do is just put my hand on the object and not pull it either direction, but just hold it in place, sort of sending the message that, it's time to talk now.
Yeah.
And what I like to do then in that kind of circumstance is if the children, even if all they're doing is saying, I had it first, I had it first, I had it first, I had it, that's still okay. They're talking to each other and they're stating their case. And sometimes people have watched me do this, and it looks like it's not going anywhere, but eventually one of the children will realize, well, you put it down, and the other one will say, but I was going to play with it later, and suddenly you have a dialogue going. Because to me, that's the gold standard, is when we get them into a dialogue with one another, encourage them to get into it. I mean, obviously they have to get into it themselves, but create an environment where they need to listen to each other and talk to each other. Sometimes it's useful when they're really emotional like that is to just repeat the words you hear.
Yes.
Frank said he had it first. Susie said she had it first. And just without any emotion, I just try to do it like I'm narrating a story this time. And often just our tone of voice helps bring down some of the emotion a little bit so they can actually listen.
That mirroring piece, those mirror neurons.
Exactly. So to me, that's kind of the way that's the ideal. And then this is the other piece that I think we struggle with as adults sometimes, is let the children solve it the way they choose to solve it. Because very often we have this preconceived notion of how the problem should be solved.
Imposing our own solutions.
Exactly. We have this adult sense of justice about things. I mean, this is a perfect example. There was one day, though, the kids were putting away a bunch of Duplos into these plastic tubs. And so they were putting them in the tubs, and there's one boy who was not participating. And that's okay. I wasn't making anybody. It was cleanup time, and some of the kids were cleaning up. But he was like pacing back and forth, kind of making a show out of not participating. And so the kids are cleaning up, and he's over there doing it. And then just as they'd done all the work, they got the boxes completely full. He raced over, he grabbed the lid and snapped the lid on it and picked up the box and took all their glory and put it away. And I thought, what a little jerk. Yeah, I didn't say that, but I'm just thinking, come on, man. The kids did all the work, and he took their glory. He stole their thunder. And then he did it again the next day. And so I, as an adult, I'm sitting here going, that's not fair. That's not fair. I shouldn't allow that to happen. And so the next day when they're putting stuff away, I distracted him. I started talking to him about dinosaurs and getting him involved in some other activity. And while the kids were cleaning up, and while I'm talking to him, one of the other children brought the lid to him. Because that was his job.
That was his contribution.
And that was the contribution. And they didn't see it as an unfair distribution of labor. They saw it as, that's the job he's picked for himself. We do this job, and he does it. And I thought that was just so, it taught me a lot. And I see it all the time. I mean, I make the mistake of imposing my adult sense of justice probably almost every day in some way. Because, we have this hubris that we know more than the children do.
Yes.
And there's only 3 categories of things, by the way. I've found that I think adults know more than children do. And one thing we know about schedules. That's one thing we know more about than children do. The second thing is I think we know more about courtesy. And the third one is I think we know more about safety. And so those are the 3 areas that we have of expertise. And I can't think of any other general category of thing that we know more than children, right? Because I I do know more about like Elizabethan fiction than most 5-year-olds, but they know more about the Frozen movie than I do. So I mean, it balances out. So to me, it's those are the three categories where we can be authorities. It's like,
Yes.
when it's time to go, we can say it's time to go.
Because we know that we're keeping track more than they get.
That's right.
Well, I totally see that like trusting their solutions thing play out a lot in coaching with individuals, family to among siblings. Like where if the siblings will have a disagreement, and like one of the siblings will say, they might be fighting over a cup, and one of the siblings will say, well, you can play with my Lego guy right now. And the parent will say, like, I'm trying to trust their solutions, but that's not fair. It's right. It has nothing to do with what the problem was. And I always have to tell them, like, to pause and say, how did the sibling respond to that? Well, the sibling was happy and took the Lego guy and went on her way. Like, she doesn't even know that she was gypped. I'm like, well, what matters is her. Yeah, she wasn't gypped. What matters is their experience of it. And that felt fair to her. And that's what matters. That's what justice is.
That's how I look at it. And I think that's how the children look at it. I don't know how we as a society got to that other piece.
Yeah. Well, we definitely get stuck in that piece of one person has to suffer in order for there to be justice.
Right. There you go. Fair enough. That makes sense.
Yes. Okay, so you take a holistic approach with children that includes holding space for their emotional world. Why do you think that's important to have that emotional piece?
Well, I mean, we can't think without emotions. Our emotions are a fundamental. I mean, emotions are essentially our sensory input and how it connects to our brains. I mean, they're fundamental. And one of the things that I think people have this idea, for the most part of the last 20th century, during the 20th century, most scientists were absolutely convinced that emotions played no role, in terms of rational thought. That emotions somehow just got in the way, that they played no much role, and that was the science, in quotes, that was used to, say, well, women shouldn't have the right to vote, and and we can't let these very emotional, dark-skinned people have these rights, and for that matter, we still use it as a way to prevent children from having certain rights. Just so you know.
Good point. Yes.
Because they're too emotional. How can they be rational? But more recent research, is finding that emotions, they play a critical role in our ability to make decisions. I mean, rather than clouding our judgment, which is the old theory, our neural systems, the ones that underlie our emotions, they're essential to high-level cognition, and decision making. And that's this has been research that's been conducted by many scientists, and it's been done over and over, that if patients who have had some kind of injury where their sensory input is disconnected from their brain, and so they don't have that kind of emotional connection. So really, they are like Mr. Spock. They're these logic people. They have a really hard time making decisions without that emotional input. That is, our emotions are essential to it. And so when we have, to me, feelings are something, and emotions are something that we have to let flourish. And we spend so much, we're so uncomfortable around them, and we feel like as adults, and again, this is something that I understand why we feel this way, but we feel like that as adults, we actually have to almost control the emotions of the children in our charge.
Yes.
And it's somehow that's impossible to do, first of all.
Yes.
And it makes us do some really ugly stuff. I mean, it's sort of like it was not long ago. So I live downtown Seattle on the Amazon.com campus. It's grown up around me. And some days my sidewalk out in front of my building is so thronged with people. It's like, being in, like New York or someplace, you can hardly move. And I was out there a while back, and there was a father and his son out in front of the building, from our building. And this boy's about 4 years old. And the boy was on one of those Strider bikes that don't have pedals. And he was just having a complete meltdown right there in the middle of the sidewalk, and the crowd was like parting around him, creating this space for him to just have this meltdown. And the father, and he was doing the best he can. I really don't like to parent judge. No parent shame here. He was doing what he felt was the right thing to do.
We're just going to learn from the example.
Exactly.
Yes.
He was, and I'm not going to name names. He was just knelt down by his son, and he was saying, if you keep acting like this, I'm going to have to take away your bike for a whole hour. And that's a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what he was doing was threatening to punish his son for doing what? He was having a strong emotional reaction, probably frustrated or angry or whatever his feeling was. He wasn't hurting anybody. I mean, here it was a busy city sidewalk. There were sirens and horns honking, and it was already noisy. So he wasn't disturbing anybody.
Yeah.
He wasn't hurting anybody. He was probably doing what a psychologist would say is a really healthy thing, is getting that emotion out, feeling the full force of that feeling. And of course, if the father had been honest with him, I think we both know what he would have been saying. It's something like, the way you're behaving is embarrassing me. And it reflects, and I feel it reflects poorly on me as a parent. And, you know, and see, here's the thing is that this is, we talked about Thomas Hobbes before, that whole idea that we have to control the behavior, others. Those of us in positions of authority, like teachers and parents, all that have to control. It's so pervasive that we're worried what other people are going to be thinking about us, that we don't control this child because they're having a meltdown in public. And the truth is, honestly, there are some people judging that dad. Like, boy, that kid has his daddy wrapped around his little finger. But instead he's threatening to punish his kid, which is just equally as bad. Just trying to lay some kind of guilt trip on him about how you're going to make me look bad. And much better. And I mean, I think we all kind of know that, and the other thing we do is we distract children. Yes. We get embarrassed. We think somehow, they're all upset. And I used to do this. I was the master of distraction when I first started teaching. So 20 years ago, when a parent would leave and the child was having separation anxiety, which is like the most normal emotion you can have, mommy's gone and I'm worried she won't come back. That's pretty upsetting. Yeah. But I found myself just like, mommy's gone. Oh, look, toys. And I was really good at like getting them. I always brag, they always stop crying within 3 minutes. Within 3 minutes, I got them to stop crying. But the thing that I didn't usually brag about is that it would come back then 15 minutes later. I want my mommy. And it would come back then 15 minutes later, and I would keep distracting them into it. And we tend to do this because we think, as a young teacher, I felt like everybody was looking at me like, well, if you got kids crying in your classroom, you're not doing your job well. You're failing. And the opposite is what I do. When a child is bawling, I sit with them. I don't join them in their emotion. I try to be calm. If they're saying words, I echo their words back to them to let them know I hear what they're saying.
Validate
it. And I just want them to know that how they're feeling is okay, because when we distract them, when we interrupt them, when we threaten them with punishment, the other one we do sometimes is we offer rewards,
bribe.
Bribe, like I'll give you a lollipop if you start behaving. And it's what we do is we stop. Emotions have a natural arc to them. There's a beginning and a middle and an end. And when we keep stopping a person's emotions before they have that full arc, they never learn that they can get through it on their own. And getting through to that other side is what empowers us then to go ahead and let our feelings flourish and get on with our lives of doing. Because our emotions are important tools that we have to understand how we feel about the world. And they are the warning lights, like on the dashboard of life. They're the signals letting you know that we better deal with something here, one way or another.
The vast majority of problems in adulthood comes from adults. The emotions that they're experiencing aren't the problem. It's their discomfort and avoidance of the emotions, like their reactions, the backflips they do to try to stop them, to interrupt that wave and to dam it up immediately before they feel it or before the people around them notice it. Like that's really where the bulk of the problems come from. And with our kids, we can really gift them with that mindfulness piece of knowing that even a really big wave will move through you if you sit with it and you become aware of it and you notice it and you feel it, and then it passes, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I'm going to say, and speaking as a man, and having been a boy, there's also that idea of shame. That your emotions are somehow shameful. You look around. I mean, boys and men, generally speaking, society gives us just really one emotion. We can be angry.
Angry, yep. A masculine mask.
Being fearful or being sad is really wimpy, right? You can't do that. So, there's studies done. By the time boys are 5 years old, they start smiling less than girls. They even stop showing their positive emotions as much. Because we're supposed to. Anyway, so, exactly what you said, but I think that also that element of shame comes in there a lot of times about how we feel. And, the emotions like I said before, rational thought cannot exist without the emotions.
Yeah.
I was this one little boy named Zane, and he was 2 years old, and his mom had come to school with him every day. And, he had been a happy guy in class, but this day she had a doctor's appointment. So she was going to leave him for the first time. And she left, and he was just bawling, sitting on the floor. And by now I'd gotten to the point in my life where I knew that I just needed to sit with him. And he was bawling. He was saying words, but he was crying so much I couldn't understand what it was. But finally I made out him saying, "I want my mommy to come back." And so I was sitting there with him. I said, "I want your mommy to come back too." And he cried a little. He cried more, and he said, "I want my mommy to come back." And I said, "Well, I want your mommy to come back too." Which has the virtue of being true. I would have liked his mommy to come back for his sake. And then he got louder, and he started almost shouting at me, "I want my mommy to come back, and I want your mommy to come back too." And then finally, he pulled himself together enough to say to me, "I want my mommy to come back." And that's when I realized he didn't give a damn what I thought.
Yes.
Right? And
yes.
so that's when I realized that I needed to echo exactly the words back to him.
You want your
mommy to come back. And that was, he got up, still crying, and started coloring a picture at the art table. It was that he needed that validation that I heard what he said and I understood it. He didn't want me to do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big lesson I've learned too, is a lot of times when we hear these, especially as a man, when I hear somebody experiencing strong emotions, especially my wife when she's crying or something like that,
problem solving.
She doesn't need me to come in and give her philosophy or ideas or strategies, which is my instinct.
Yes.
What she needs me to do is come in and just listen and stroke her and just say, you're going to be okay.
Yes.
And be there with her. And that's so anyway, that was a big epiphany for me as a man and as a teacher.
Yes. Oh, I hope everybody really hears that and soaks that in. Okay, so I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about reading. There is so much pressure on parents and young children to master skills before they are ready, before their brains are ready, before there's an interest or a context for it. As unschoolers, we reject all those arbitrary timetables, but I know there are a lot of families out there on the school path who quiver with anxiety at the mention of words like kindergarten readiness.
Right.
What do you say to them?
Well, I mean, it's okay. First of all, the natural window for children to learn how to read is between about 5 and 11 years old.
Yes.
It's a massive window. And most people freak out if their 8-year-old's not reading. They're really starting to freak out. But homeschoolers who have had the courage to let reading emerge on their own, and this has been documented, and it's not probably in a study form, but more anecdotally, who allow the reading to emerge on its natural timeline, find that their children, they might not start to read till they're 10 or 11 years old, but within a couple weeks they're reading Harry Potter.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because it's not like they're not doing literacy work in the meantime. They're just not reading. And there's been a lot of studies on this too. The Cambridge University, so this was probably 5 or 6 years ago, they decided to take and do a survey of all the research on literacy education that they could find. And their number one, and so this is, again, you guys are more radical and I'm more radical than they suggest, but they say their number one recommendation is that formal literacy instruction should not begin until the age of 7.
Mm-hmm.
So there we go, second grade, so that's, or even late first grade. So this is what they're saying, because what they found is that children who got literacy instruction at 5 years old got a tiny head start on the other children. That head start disappeared by the time they were 8 years old. And by the time the children were 15 years old, the children who had received the early instruction were reading with lower comprehension and less often for pleasure. Yes. So in fact, what we're doing by forcing it early is we're causing children to hate reading.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, reading is one of these things that is actually, and you've probably heard this metaphor before, but the metaphor I love is if we started putting infants into school at birth, it would take less than a generation before we become convinced we needed school to teach them how to walk and talk.
Yes. And that's exactly what I point to when parents question that, when they start to panic about their child reading or saying, well, but reading, that's where you have to really buckle down. And I say, my children learn to read just like they learn to talk and they learn to walk. If you live in a literate society and you have parents who read, it's nearly impossible to not learn to read. If you were to tell your children, I don't want you to read, don't read. You wouldn't be able to stop them, just like you wouldn't be able to stop them from walking or talking. You know, if they're around people who talk and they're around language, then they learn language. And reading really does unfold naturally on a similar trajectory if we hold the space for it.
And the only exception being children with certain learning disabilities.
Yes, and same with walking, right? Like if your child has like a physical difference where they need like braces for their legs to learn to walk, then you would give them that support.
But instead, what we've done is we've given everybody that support. We've put them all on crutches.
Yes.
And you know, it's my friend Danita Dinger. She has this great way of talking about this. She says, you know, kindergarten readiness. Okay, by the rationale that we've got to get these 5-year-olds ready for kindergarten before they're in kindergarten. She goes, by that argument, you know, all of us should be wearing our Depends right now. Because we're going to need them someday. It's going to be humiliating and hard. So we might as well start practicing. You know, we might as well have our teeth removed now and get the dentures in because we're going to have to deal with that someday. I mean, so it's the ludicrousness of getting, you know, young children ready for something that's down the road is insane. They need the chance to be 4-year-olds when they're 4, 5-year-olds when they're 5, 6-year-olds when they're 6.
Yes.
To me, the whole kindergarten readiness thing, our school readiness, which they call it sometimes, which actually is a more honest term, by the way.
Yes, it is.
Because it's like training them to sit, you know, to do the factory stuff we talked about.
Exactly. Yeah, I have said before, like, how will your child ever learn to eat if you breastfeed them or bottle feed them? You know, like somehow they do, right? Because they need the breast or bottle feeding in that season. And so we give that to them. And then when they're ready to eat, if you were to try again to deny that and say, no, I never want you to learn how to eat, they still would. It doesn't require instruction. They will. They watch you eat. You expose them to foods. You give them dishes. Like, they learn it.
I think the people that are the hardest to persuade of this idea about reading being a natural part of most humans' development are people who made a career out of teaching children to read. I think very often the people who've done that, and they're sincere, good people.
Yes.
Right? They believe they have their methods and their ideas, and they've seen children joyfully reading. So it's not like they're doing a horrible thing, but trying to create it earlier, because that's what we're doing now, is we're making it earlier and earlier. I mean, the expectation really, most 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds are picking it up on their own anyway. You know, so really the teachers, you get to be a hero, because everybody thinks, you know, I feel like teachers get this all the time. I get credit for, like just the other day, somebody thanked me for helping their son get over his separation anxieties. And I said, you know, or, you know, you can just give him credit for it, because it would have happened whether I was there or not. I'll take the credit. Thank you. Yes. I don't want to be a jerk about it. I'll take the compliment. But teachers get this. We get this. We get credit for a lot of things that are perfectly normal developmentally, and it makes me laugh. It is entertaining to take credit for some things that nature would have done anyway.
Yes, it's so true. And then we have this false belief that without that experience, they never would have gotten that result. Like, if you hadn't been in this child's life, he would have never gotten over separation anxiety.
Right.
Like, he would have been 16 and trying to go on dates, but his mom has to come with him. I mean,
exactly.
Let's talk about playgrounds. What should they have and why?
Well, they need space. But fundamentally, to me, I think we live in a cult of toys. And the idea that children need toys, and that's of course a really new phenomenon in the big picture. There's not really a lot of evidence of toys being part of children's lives. I mean, most children had maybe 1 or 2 toys up until around the 1940s or 50s. That was kind of when the idea. I mean, I can't remember what it was. I think it was some kind of toy machine gun was the first mass marketed toy. The Thunder Burp machine gun, Mattel or somebody made it. And that suddenly was the idea that suddenly you're advertising toys outside of the Christmas season, and that sort of sparked it. The truth is, though, if you think, you know, children really are more motivated by the real world.
Yes, the real tools of daily living.
And the mental experiment I ask people to try is just, you know, imagine you're in a room with young children and you bring in a toy lawnmower and a real lawnmower. Which one are they going to play with? Every kid goes to the real lawnmower. They all want to play with that. around the classroom. Children always want to help tidy up. There'll be an adult sweeping up. Rice has been spilled on the floor or something from the sensory bin, and she's sweeping that up. And there's always children who then want to participate. And I made the mistake one time of going out and I bought lots of little child-side brooms and dustpans. They don't want those little toy ones. They want to use the big one. They always want to do with the real things in the real world.
Yes.
That's why it's important to have, woodworking tools around and things like that, and give them the opportunity to put their hands on the real world things. A playground to me is a place that has lots of natural elements. So you're going to want, you need sticks and rocks and pine cones and all of that kind of stuff. And literally, I've been in playgrounds where they don't occur naturally. So you bring them in, go and fill up a garbage bag full of this stuff and dump it out on the playground. Children need the real things from their world. The recycling bin is a great source for toys. The bottles, the cans, the containers that you're already going to be throwing away anyway.
Amazon delivery boxes.
Amazon delivery boxes. You shouldn't have to spend a lot of money on toys. So somebody one time wrote me and they said, well, I was just given a $2,000 grant to build my playground. What should I spend it on? And I said, well, first of all, spend $100 of it and save $1,900, for something else. Because the truth is that our playground, for example, we just use materials basically that are junk from the family's homes. So everybody knows if you get your tires replaced on your car, you bring the old tires into the school because tires make a great playground resource. If you're doing a construction project home, all the offcuts of wood, bring them in. They become natural building blocks for the children. Planks of wood, ropes, things that are real tools in the real world become our playground space. Broken toys still live on our plate. We still have toys, but we only have broken ones. I had a boy come to me the other day and he said he was new on the playground and he held up this truck that had no wheels and he said, broken. And I said, yeah, it's broken. And he said, it's broken. He looked really concerned. And then I said, everything out here is broken. And he thought that was a funny idea. And he started going around and it was true. Every single thing he picked up was broken. Everything was broken, yet kids are still playing with them all the time. You don't need to buy new stuff. You play with them till they're gone. Mm-hmm. And I have this theory about preschool shouldn't exist to use stuff. We should exist to finish using stuff. And I think that's what childhood should be about. Childhood should be about every child should spend time going to their local dump and scavenging through there. There should be ways for us to do that. For children to get the stuff that everybody else is throwing away and playing with, because that's the true treasure. And we all know that's true. We see it all the time. That's the classic joke at Christmas time.
Yes.
Is the children want to play with the boxes and the wrapping paper and the bows way more than the toys they just got. So for me, really, you need a place to dig in a playground. You asked about playground. There has to be a place for digging. There has to be an opportunity to play with water, which is that endlessly fascinating. The way for water, we have a cast iron water pump, so that's one of the ways to bring it onto. But just a spigot with a hose that they can use. Now that might be a little different in environments where you have to have water shortages, but in Seattle we don't have that issue. Yeah. So, but obviously, having an amount of water every day for children to play with is vital. I think there should be opportunities for children to, like I said, do woodworking and work with real tools and have the experience. We do everything and take risks. I mean, that's absolutely essential. You can't talk about play without talking about risk.
Oh, I could not agree more. When we design playgrounds that are so insulated from real tools or meaningful, exciting, fun experiences.
Well, I'll give you the example that I always say is, everybody has these climbers, right? You buy the climber and you assemble it on your playground. They have a ladder. You run up and down the ladder and slide down the slide and down the poles. And what I think we're doing harm actually to the children, because in the real world, a ladder is a dangerous thing. In the real world, a ladder, you got to make sure it's on level ground. You want somebody to hold it for you while you climb up. You want to make sure you don't get too close to the top rung, or else it gets top heavy and falls over. And so you really want to make sure. That's why on our playground we have very few opportunities. We have only one fixed ladder. Everything else, if the children want to get up high, they have to get their own ladder out and negotiate how to use that ladder to get up to the highest place where they are. It's everything from step stools up to step ladders. And so I think that's really important. And this was, we introduced the ladders after a conversation I had one night with an emergency room nurse. And I was talking to him about, I said, this is a good opportunity for me to learn something. I said, well, we were introducing a lot of woodworking stuff at the time. And I said to him, well, what's the number one injury from a construction site? And he said, well, nail guns. And so I said, okay, well, we're not going to have nail guns on the playground. And then his second one, though, he said the second one was falling from ladders. And so to me, that was that's a common everyday thing that people are constantly getting hurt. So why not give children a chance to actually work on those skills now at an early age?
I think that's brilliant. Sad, tragic, true story. The family who built the house that we live in, the woman died falling off a ladder cleaning the exterior windows. So my husband is often doing projects around the house. I'm often doing projects around our fixer-upper. And anytime we take a ladder out, we leave it out for hours. And the kids have so much fun on the ladder, but we don't wall anchor it and support the ladder. They help us to use the ladder for meaningful ways, and they feel out how it moves. I think something similar happens with chairs too. Most toddlers hit a point where they want to climb chairs, and so the parents say, so we put all the dining room chairs up on top of the table so they can't reach them. And I say, no, they'll never learn to safely interact with them. This is a great developmental, don't buy toys, instead just pull out your dining room chairs and let them learn how the chairs balance and lose balance, and feel that out, put it on a flooring where you don't want to set the dining room chair at the top of a staircase, but let them feel it out as the chair starts to tip when they stand up. You can catch it, or you can let it fall, or you can, but let them feel that out. That's how we learn to interact safely with our environment. That comes through access and experience.
Yeah, well, and a lot of, we call it risky play, and I've been trying to teach myself to call it safety play, because ultimately that's what they're doing, is teaching themselves how to be safe.
Yes. Oh my God, that's so true. I mean, that chair example, when that kid comes across a chair and their mom's not there, that's the risk. Whereas in allowing them to interact with these materials, we create that safety. Same with child-proofing everything in a home. I really try and discourage parents from that, and instead I say, I try to encourage them to create a child-integrated home environment. We have one drawer in our kitchen that is the sharp drawer, and it's higher up, and even that's not latched, but they know that they can interact totally freely with everything else, and if they want to use a knife from that drawer, we do it together. Again, they're learning how to interact with all the tools in the kitchen, and I love that you're bringing that concept that I help families a lot with in the home environment to the playground environment. Let that play happen.
We use hot glue guns out on the playground. And even the 2-year-olds are using these hot glue guns. And people always ask, well, don't the 2-year-olds burn themselves? And I say, yes. Yeah. They do. Everybody burns themselves when they're learning to use a hot glue gun. You do it whether you're 58 or 2, whatever age you are. That's part of using a hammer. The part of the process of learning to use a hammer is hitting your thumb. Yes. Everybody has to hit their thumb with a hammer to learn how to use it. It doesn't matter what age you are. And this is, again, you might want to cut this piece out, but the truth is, it's very clear young children are designed to learn through their injuries. Yep. They're low to the ground. They don't have far to fall. Yes. Their bones are super flexible. It's really hard to break those bones. And when they do break, they heal miraculously fast. There was a boy a few years ago who broke his femur during the first week of school. Oof. In less than 30 days, he was running full speed on the playground. I mean, Think about it. I'm 58. If I break my femur, I might not ever walk again. Their teeth grow back. Their skulls, when they're born, aren't even all the way fused. So when they bump their heads, there's room for their brains to swell where they don't get a concussion. And their skin, when it gets cut, it heals. Sometimes you can even just watch it healing. You sit there, you could see it healing while you're looking at it. Their skin heals miraculously fast. I mean, I've got scabs on my knees that have been there for a month.
So true. So true.
So you're not going to talk to a playground licensor about this, but the truth is that as a parent and as an educator and as an important adult in a child's life, it's important to understand that if we don't give them the opportunities to acquire some of these fundamental childhood owies, what we're doing is pushing those off into the future. Yes. Because they're going to have to experience them at some point. And why not now when their bodies are designed to heal? Yes. Then wait till they're older when their bodies have stopped healing as well.
And that honoring that self-directed learning piece. Like, when should they learn X? Like, when they show an interest in learning it. And if right now is when they're showing an interest in learning about safety in chairs, like, then let that happen. We just finished reading this book called The War That Saved My Life, and it's about this family during the Nazi occupation in Great Britain. And at one point, the boy falls out of a tree and breaks his arm, and it's this scary thing. And this one person in the family says, "Well, you're never climbing a tree again." And all the other people in the community say, "Of course he's climbing a tree again. This is how he is going to learn to, be competent in the world." And I'm like, yeah, how did we today lose that knowledge? Yeah. Like that was so basic.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, it started in the 80s. There was all that playground safety stuff. And if you look at there's never been really much research done on playground safety or how to make them safe. Most of it is just people's best guesses. And even insurance companies, if you really track back their research, what they call research, it's almost always goes back to groups of concerned citizens who decided, let's pad this, or let's round that corner.
Yeah.
And certainly I'm glad kids wear helmets on their bikes.
Right.
I'm glad we have seat belts in the cars. There's certainly been some great safety progress we've made. I think standing on the transmission hump in the back seat of your car while you're driving is probably not, like we used to do, is probably not the best idea. But generally speaking, I think we've, obviously the pendulum swung too far, and I think it's time for us to honor the bandages.
I wholeheartedly agree. Okay, let's talk about your new project, because I know you are leaving your beloved Woodland Park and beginning a new adventure with a program called Weekdays, designed to help people start their own play-based neighborhood preschools. What hole are you trying to fill, and what is your vision for what these communities will look like?
Yeah, all right. So I was at Woodland Park for close to 20 years, and it just seemed like the right time to move on to something else. My partners approached me and said, here's the thing is, right now, if we look at what's happening in the childcare preschool market in the U.S. right now, something like 51% of the U.S. is what we would classify as a childcare desert, meaning that there's 3 children for every 1 spot available, and not everybody can homeschool, not everybody can do that, and there's a huge demand. But obviously the market, and so what's happening is sort of these big corporations are sort of sucking up some of that by creating these big preschools where families have to drive for an hour and a half to drop their kids off, and it's costing a couple $1,000s a month for these people to get for childcare, which is very expensive, and families are also spending half their lives in cars taking their kids around. And a lot of them are having to cobble together these, in very stressful ways, cobble together childcare. And our idea is, what we want to do is we want to encourage and support mainly women, but men as well, but mostly these are going to be women to start their own preschools and daycares in their own homes, in their own neighborhoods. So these are going to be small ones. These are to us, it's 4 to 8 children. Our goal is, Bill Gates said when he started Microsoft, he wanted a computer on every desk. What we're saying is we want to have a preschool on every block. Every neighborhood should have its own neighborhood preschool where the people, where this is your neighbor where your child is spending their days, rather than spending their days at some institution somewhere. And the other piece that we really we're excited about is that, in Washington State, the average preschool teacher makes $25,000 a year. I mean, you can't live on that.
No, you cannot.
And so our model is good. What we're trying to do is get that income up. So we're thinking most of the people that come to us are going to be able to make at least $60,000 a year. So we're pretty much more than doubling the income for these women and giving them the autonomy to run their own businesses and in their own neighborhoods with their neighbors, bringing their children to them to spend their days together. And so to me, it's very village-like. It's very much I love the idea. I'm inspired by the idea of not just creating homey places for children to spend their days rather than institutions, but I'm also excited about this idea that I can have a hand in creating tens of thousands of women entrepreneurs out there who are doing it for themselves.
That is an incredible and a beautiful vision, and I completely understand it now. It's clear, like, your passion for it in the way that you talk about it. And I mean, you really are right. Like, that's a really big hole that needs to be filled. And it seems like it would benefit so many people on all different sides of that relationship when you're forming those communities in these neighborhoods.
Yeah, well, to me, when the revolution finally comes, we won't need preschools and daycares. But until the revolution comes, parents need the support. And I just really love the idea that you're going to find it right there with their neighbors, right there in their own neighborhood. And I want to spread this all over the country. This to me is a way. I told the children. So Thursday was my last day. So just a couple of days ago was my last day in class. And I told the children, I was very emotional. And I said, I've been a teacher. I've been teaching children for a long time. And now I'm going to be teaching adults about how to work with children. And I'm really excited. I'll continue to blog. I'll continue to write my books. I'm going to continue to speak and do all the things I do because it also serves the same purpose of just expanding the access to play-based early years education for young children.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I'm going to keep on supporting you from over here in my little niche and sharing your posts and telling people about your work. And I have to ask you, because I mean, your vision is incredible, and it's not even just a vision because you have created this and lived this for so many years. Why not beyond preschool age?
Why don't I do it?
Not necessarily why don't you, and we totally don't have to include this, but I'm just totally curious what your view is on that.
As far as I'm concerned, that play-based learning, which maybe we quit calling it play-based when you get a little older. Somehow we have this idea that only children play.
Yeah.
And well, the truth is that most adults don't play anymore.
Sadly.
I mean, honestly, most adults have forgotten what play is. They might play with their children, but to me, that's not the same thing as adults playing. Adults need to have their, going out and dancing, doing things that you choose of your own volition, taking some risks, and all of that kind of stuff. So most adults don't do it at all anymore. What I honestly believe, though, that we should spend our lives at play. We should constantly be doing exactly what the children do when they play, coming together with other people, bickering with them for a while,
take risks,
learn how to work with one another. That would be the best way to educate people. Now there are models called democratic free schools. You probably heard of them, the Sudbury Valley schools. That's the most famous one, but there's ones all over the country. And they base essentially, so self-directed learning is what we usually start saying instead of play-based education. And these are schools without curriculum other than what the children bring to the table. So the children create their own curriculum. If the children want classes, they can ask I guess they still call them teachers, but the adults that are around to help them, to support them with resources they might need. And it's all multi-age. It's children from, whatever the age is, 2 up to 18 years old altogether, creating, like I said before, cobbling together their own education based on their interests and passions and playing with each other.
Oh, I love that. And I've never heard you talk about that before. So I think that's really valuable for people to hear. So you sort of view the self-directed education, free democratic schools, agile learning center type thing as an extension of the philosophy, approach, vision, whatever that you have for the play-based preschools. That's sort of how you see continuing that.
I think all the play-based models, even Montessori and Reggio and Waldorf and all of those, including the crunchy granola hippie stuff that I support, all of us are essentially doing a version of democratic education of these democratic free schools. And I'm inspired by them, and I love reading stories out of those schools. And I love, I in fact, not long ago had a parent who was a graduate of the Sudbury Valley School who had brought her child to our school. And I just spent all my free time picking her brain about what was that like? What was that like? So
awesome.
I'm very passionate about the idea that we could be doing this. I mean,
Got it.
It should be that way. And I think that, I keep saying, all that's left right now really are the preschools. Play has disappeared from kindergarten. Play is disappearing from elementary school in general. And it's damaging children. I mean, it's well documented that we have a rapid increase in mental illnesses among children, especially around anxiety and things like that.
Yep.
And these can be directly traced to our having these expectations that they do things they're not developmentally ready for, and adult expectations and not having the opportunity to, and always being judged.
Yeah, and these unnatural social systems that they are placed in schools.
all these same age cohorts where everybody's the same age. And that's the other piece, that our weekday schools will be, they're all multi-age. We're hoping that all of them are infant through 5. So we will have all the neighborhood schools. Because to me, that's one of the things that we never were quite able to get off the ground at my Woodland Park school, was to create multi-age, because the school had been around since the 70s, and there was a lot of institutional memory about that. And we tried very hard, but we never quite got there. Maybe they'll be able to do it once I'm gone.
Well, you'll get to live that out in your new weekdays program. So I'm so excited about that for you. Well, let's move into our Q&A. I posted in the Sage Parenting Tribe on Facebook and my Sage Family Patreon community that we were going to chat today with Teacher Tom about play-based preschools, and asked if anyone had any questions about it. Yana Campbell asks, we participate in an outdoor co-op playgroup, maybe. We have a few kids who are much happier one-on-one. Group activities are not where they thrive and often result in connection-seeking behaviors like pushing and grabbing. I'd love to know how to best support these kids when most are engaged in a group activity. It isn't always possible to give undivided attention to these littles when they need a person to engage with.
Oh, that's a good question. Sorry, excuse me.
That's okay.
Mute button. So obviously not everybody wants to sit down. It depends on what the group activities are. I mean, that to me, and I don't have enough information to really give good advice on this, because if the group activities are sitting in a circle and singing songs that somebody else is picking for you, I can see why some kids are going to say, I don't want to do that. If the group activities are, we're all going to look at these pine cones today, and that kid's really interested in rocks that day, I can understand why they might not want to feel compelled to come and hang out with the group. But if it's, generally speaking, these are children who feel more comfortable playing by themselves, I think that in a play-based setting, we don't, at least I have never required children to come to our circle times or our group activities. They're always one of the options that are available. What I have found, however, that if we're spending our group time on something that's truly meaningful and important to the community, most children, most days are going to want to be part of that. So by that I mean, whenever we ended up talking about our agreements with each other, which I mentioned before, every kid has a say in that. They all want to be part of that. And they always come, even if they're off in the corner of the room doing something else, the moment we start talking about, I don't think we should be able to, pull each other's hair. Boy, that kid is over there because they want to be part of that discussion. Because they want to say, they want to have something to say in it.
Yeah.
But I think that's, and a lot of times, group activities, we go through, development isn't a gradual progression. It's a spiky type of thing. And so we all go through phases where we need that time alone to be more internally focused, and then the time where we work together with groups. And you can't really force it. So for me, if you have the opportunity, I would say, well, let the kids do it, set up a group activity, create the group activity or the opportunity. But children, if they're not freely choosing to be part of it, then you're actually directing their play rather than letting them freely play. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's my instinct on that one.
No, I love that. I think that's great. I think too, like if you have a child well, first of all, I completely agree with everything that Teacher Tom just said about participation in a group activity is never mandatory. And are the kids really given a seat at the table? And, are you like basing these activities on their interests and all that? And Yana is someone that I've interacted with a lot, and I'm sure that that's happening there. But I would say too, if you have a couple of kids who consistently don't want to participate in the group activity, and when they choose not to participate, they are somehow harming others who are trying to participate.
Right.
I would really sit down and collaborate with that child around how you can help support their needs when they do choose not to participate. So like really try and get some of the solutions from the individual kid about what might help them to be more happy or content or successful if they choose not to participate. Like what would they like to do instead?
Well, that's what I was going to say is it's fine if they're, if they're verbal. Obviously, children who are quite young, they might not be able to, tell you. But the truth is give them a choice. What else do you want to be doing?
Yes.
What would you rather be doing right now? Because if it is attention-seeking behavior, it's because they want attention, and you might not always be able to give them one-on-one, but maybe there's something that they can put their attention on while you're doing other things.
Yeah, like maybe there's a special activity that opens for them during that group activity. I mean, just to get really creative and open to their solutions around
But the truth is, if this is an outdoor school, she said, right? Or a forest school.
Yes.
There should be plenty of stuff already to do.
Yes. So true. All right, let's move into our deep dive. The show notes can be found at sageparenting.com/podcast42, where you can also subscribe and get future show notes sent right to your inbox. What are your favorite resources for people to dive deeper into this topic? So if they want to learn more about it, where should they go?
Well, I mean, not to be a self-promoter, but
No,
I think
please.
the Teacher Tom blog is a great place to sort of get more into depth into what I've been talking about here. I have a book called Teacher Tom's First Book, and you can find that by Googling Teacher Tom's First Book.
We're going to link to all of your goodness in the show notes for sure. We're going to link to your book. We're going to link to your blog. I'm going to link to your Facebook. I'm going to link to your new weekdays.
Thank you.
Program.
But I think the other thing, I always recommend Peter Gray's book, Free to Learn. I think that book is a great way to deep dive into why play and why play-based education is really the natural way for humans to be educating themselves.
Yes, he was in an earlier episode of this podcast, one of my favorites. He is brilliant. I tried very hard to contain my fangirliness while I was having that conversation with him.
Well, he talks about more than just early years,
yes.
But he's definitely somebody that I highly recommend that book. I also find it's really useful to me, as I like to spend a lot of time going into resources that aren't specifically early childhood related. To me, anything on neuroscience or the human brain is fascinating because it sparks incredible insights. One I'm reading right now that I just find fascinating is a book called Proust was a neuroscientist. And I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but that book there has really opened my eyes to a lot of the ways we process information and the way our senses work.
Ooh, I'll check that out.
No, it was written back in the early 2000s, so it's been around for a while. It was a free download on Kindle, and now I'm really happy I got it. Another book that I really found myself becoming really reflective about my practice while reading was a book called *Sapiens*. Which was a New York Times bestseller. Yeah, by the author's name is Harari, Harari, and Israeli scientist, I believe, historian. And he really creates a context for the evolution of the human species that really got me thinking not just about the present, but also the future, both near future and distant future, about humankind. And we need to think about that when we're working with young children, is what the future is going to look like.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm adding that one to my list right now.
Well, and I know that, and I would be remiss if I did not, just do my shout out to Janet Lansbury. I love her work, her Rye Method stuff, and the Magda Gerber piece. I go to her for anything to do with the infant.
Awesome. Teacher Tom, I cannot thank you enough for coming on and having this conversation. I know I need to give a little shout out to Melissa and thank her for putting us in connection, but I've been a huge fan for so long, and this conversation has vastly exceeded my expectations. It's been one of my favorites, so I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Rachel. That's so nice.